You're past your prime, Mom. Nobody wants to hear your old stories anymore. The words hit me like ice water thrown in my face. My daughter Sarah stood in my kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, her voice sharp as broken glass. The morning sun streamed through my lace curtains, but suddenly everything felt cold and gray. My hands trembled as I set down the coffee cup. 40 years of teaching children to read and write. 40 years of believing that stories mattered, that wisdom earned through living had value. The ceramic clinked against the saucer, a small sound in the sudden silence. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing my ribs. Sarah's face looked hard, impatient. She tapped her foot against my linoleum floor, the same floor where she'd done homework as a little girl. Your writing workshop idea is embarrassing, she continued, not caring how her words landed. Nobody wants to learn from an 80-year-old woman who never published anything real. It's time to accept reality. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and cinnamon from my morning baking, but now it felt cloying, too sweet. My throat burned with unshed tears. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, marking each second of my humiliation. The cruel words echoed in my mind as I watched my daughter's face. She looked like her father when he was angry. Cold eyes, tight lips, completely sure she was right. But something stirred deep in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something harder. Something that had survived 40 years of classroom chaos and teenage rebellion and budget cuts that tried to break my spirit. My fingers found the worn notebook I kept on the counter, the one filled with story ideas and memories. I see, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm in my heart. Sarah's eyes flickered with surprise at my calm tone. She'd expected tears, maybe begging. Instead, I smiled, a small secret smile that she couldn't read. Thank you for being so honest with me, dear. I picked up my pen and made a small note in my notebook. Sarah frowned, trying to see what I was writing. But some things, I thought, are worth keeping to yourself until the right moment comes. 3 days after Sarah's cruel words, I sat in the same kitchen chair, but everything felt different. The morning light revealed papers scattered across my table, not random scribblings, but careful plans. My teaching career hadn't just given me classroom management skills. It had taught me how to research, how to organize, how to turn chaos into order. The coffee tasted stronger today, more purposeful. I'd spent those 3 days digging through my cedar chest, my filing cabinets, my memory boxes. Letters from former students who'd become doctors and teachers themselves. Thank you notes from parents whose children I'd taught to love reading. Newspaper clippings of school events I'd organized, plays I'd directed, reading programs I'd created. My fingers traced over a photo of myself at the district awards ceremony, holding a plaque for Teacher of the Year, not once but 3 times. The paper was yellowed with age, but the pride in my younger face was still bright. The phone rang, interrupting my memories. Hello, Mrs. Henderson? The voice was young, nervous. This is Tommy Martinez. I was in your 3rd grade class. God, must be 25 years ago now. My heart warmed. Tommy had been one of my struggling readers, a quiet boy who'd thought books were his enemy. I'm calling because I just became a principal and I wanted you to know, you saved my life. You made me believe I was smart. The words settled into my chest like honey, sweet and golden. After I hung up, I stared at my notebook again. Sarah thought my stories didn't matter. She thought 80 years of living, of learning, of touching young minds was worthless. But Tommy's voice echoed in my head, and I remembered something important. I'd never needed anyone's permission to teach before. Why would I need it now? The house felt warmer, more alive. My fingers found their rhythm on the worn paper as I began to write. That evening, as Sarah called to check on me with that careful, guilty voice she'd used since our fight, I listened to her plans for my golden years. Rest, she said. Relaxation. Maybe a nice assisted living place where I could play bingo and watch TV. I made all the right sounds, agreeing where she expected agreement. But my eyes stayed on the stack of papers growing on my kitchen table. Let her think she'd won, I thought. Let her think she'd convinced the foolish old woman to give up her silly dreams. 2 weeks of Sarah's helpful suggestions had worn my patience thin. She'd started dropping by unannounced, clucking her tongue at my writing supplies, moving my papers to tidy up my workspace. This morning she'd gone too far. I found my manuscript pages, 50 pages of carefully crafted memories and teaching stories crumpled in my wastebasket like yesterday's newspaper. The sight hit me like a physical blow. I was just cleaning, she said when I confronted her, not even trying to look sorry. That messy pile was attracting dust. Her voice carried that patronizing tone people use with children and the elderly, as if my feelings didn't matter anymore. The morning air felt heavy with humidity, pressing down on my shoulders like wet wool. My hands shook as I smoothed out the wrinkled pages, trying to save weeks of work. Some of the ink had smudged. Stories about children I'd taught, lessons I'd learned, wisdom earned through decades of service, treated like garbage. The breaking point came when Sarah opened my laptop and started deleting my files. "These old photos are taking up space," she muttered, clicking through folders without permission. When I saw her finger hovering over the delete button for a folder labeled Student Letters, something inside me snapped. These weren't just random files. They were digital copies of every thank you note, every graduation announcement, every wedding invitation from former students who'd stayed in touch. 20 years of proof that my teaching had mattered. "Stop." The word came out harder than I'd intended. Sarah's hand froze on the mouse. "These are mine. You have no right." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, cramped. The tick of the grandfather clock seemed louder, more insistent. Sarah's face flushed red, and I could see her father's temper rising in her cheeks. She'd inherited his need to control everything, his belief that being louder made him right. But she'd forgotten something important about her mother. "You can't stop me from helping you," she said, her voice rising to that dangerous pitch I remembered from her teenage years. "You're not thinking clearly anymore. You need guidance." The words hung in the air like poison gas. She thought age had made me weak, made me stupid. She thought I'd roll over and let her destroy everything I'd built. But standing there in my kitchen, surrounded by 40 years of teaching memories, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Power. Real, quiet, unshakable power. "We'll see about that," I whispered, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah looked uncertain. Searching for a pen in Sarah's purse, she'd borrowed mine again, I found something that made my blood run cold. A manila folder labeled Mom's Care Plan in her neat handwriting. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Legal documents. Conservatorship papers. Medical evaluation requests. All carefully prepared, just waiting for signatures. The kitchen floor seemed to tilt under my feet as I read her methodical plan to have me declared incompetent. The paperwork was thorough, professional. Sarah had consulted lawyers, researched facilities, even toured memory care units. The breath caught in my throat as I read her notes, shows signs of confusion. Poor judgment. Needs supervision. Every conversation we'd had lately was documented, twisted to support her case. My passion for writing became obsessive behavior. My independence became dangerous stubbornness. She'd been building a legal case while pretending to worry about me. The worst part was the financial documents. Sarah had already started the process of accessing my accounts for my own protection. 40 years of careful saving, my teacher's pension, the small inheritance from my parents, all of it would disappear into her control. The house where I'd raised her, where I'd graded papers late into the night and planned lessons at the kitchen table, would be sold to pay for the care she'd decided I needed. My hands shook as I photographed each page with my phone, the camera clicking softly in the quiet house. But as I read deeper into her plan, something unexpected happened. Instead of despair, I felt a familiar sensation from my teaching days. It was the feeling I'd gotten when a difficult student finally showed me their weakness, their strategy, their next move. Sarah thought she was so clever, so careful. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten that her mother had spent 4 decades dealing with manipulation, lies, and teenage schemes. She'd forgotten that teachers learn to see 3 moves ahead. I carefully returned the folder to her purse, making sure everything looked exactly as I'd found it. My heart was beating fast, but not with fear. With excitement. Sarah thought she held all the cards, thought she was the smart one in this game. But she'd just shown me her entire hand while I kept mine hidden. As I heard her car pulling into the driveway, I smiled. Let her come in with her fake concern and her controlling suggestions. Let her think her plan was still secret. I had work to do, and now I knew exactly how much time I had to do it. While Sarah thought I was accepting reality, I was actually building something she never expected. My first call went to Margaret Olson, my former teaching partner and the most organized woman I'd ever known. "Maggie," I said, "I need your help with a project." Within an hour, she was at my kitchen table with her laptop, legal pad, and the fierce expression she used to wear during parent-teacher conferences when someone questioned our methods. The second call went to Dr. Patricia Williams, my former principal and now the district superintendent. Pat had started as a young teacher under my mentoring, and we'd kept in touch through her rise to the top. "Eleanor," her voice was warm with genuine affection, "what can I do for you?" When I explained my situation carefully, Sarah's attempts to control my life, her condescending attitude about my writing, Pat's tone turned sharp. "That girl always was too big for her britches. What do you need?" My third ally surprised even me. James Fletcher, the lawyer who'd handled my divorce 30 years ago, was now a silver-haired expert in elder law. When I called him, I expected a polite brush-off. Instead, he laughed. "Eleanor Henderson, I still tell people about how you documented your ex-husband's financial shenanigans. Best case preparation I ever saw from a civilian." His voice grew serious when I mentioned conservatorship papers. "Bring me everything you have. And Eleanor? Don't let on that, you know. These things work best when the other side thinks they're winning." That evening, as Sarah made her daily check-in call, I played my role perfectly. I complained about feeling tired, mentioned forgetting where I'd put my glasses, even stumbled slightly over a word. "Maybe you're right about me needing more help," I said, injecting just enough uncertainty into my voice. I could practically hear her satisfaction through the phone. "Don't worry, Mom. I'm taking care of everything." If only she knew how right she was, just not in the way she thought. By the end of the week, my kitchen table had become a war room. Margaret arrived every morning with coffee and tactical planning. Pat sent me resources about older adults' rights and documentation of mental competency. James prepared counter paperwork that would stop Sarah's legal moves cold. But the best part was yet to come. I'd started writing again, not just my book, but letters to every former student I could find online. The response was overwhelming. They wanted to hear my stories. They wanted to learn from their old teacher. And when I hinted that someone was trying to silence me, they got angry. Very angry. Sarah's suspicions grew sharper as my decline didn't progress fast enough for her timeline. She started showing up at random times, trying to catch me in moments of confusion she could document. Tuesday morning, she walked in as Margaret and I were reviewing legal documents at the kitchen table. My heart hammered against my ribs, but years of classroom quick thinking saved me. "Margaret was just showing me photos of her grandchildren," I said, quickly sliding the papers under a magazine. Margaret, bless her teacher's heart, immediately launched into a detailed story about her grandson's soccer game. The worst moment came when Sarah found my laptop open to an email from a former student. Jenny Morrison, now a published author, had written, "Mrs. Henderson, I'd love to help you publish your book. Your stories shaped my life." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she read over my shoulder. "What book?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The kitchen air felt thick with tension. I could feel Margaret watching from the living room, ready to help if needed. My mind raced through possible explanations. "Oh, that," I laughed, trying to sound confused and embarrassed. "I've been writing down some old teaching memories. Nothing serious." I closed the laptop quickly. "Jenny's just being kind, you know how former students are." Sarah's face relaxed slightly, but her eyes stayed suspicious. She spent the next hour going through my papers, looking for evidence of what she clearly saw as deception. I let her search, knowing she'd find only the harmless stories I'd left visible. The real work was hidden in places she'd never think to look. That evening, James called with urgent news. "Sarah's moving faster than we thought. She's scheduled your competency evaluation for next week." My blood chilled. If Sarah's hired psychiatrist found me confused or incompetent, her conservatorship would go through automatically. "But I have good news too," James continued. "I've been in touch with the State Elder Abuse Prevention Office. What she's doing, isolating you, controlling your finances, dismissing your autonomy, it's textbook emotional elder abuse. We have options." The next morning brought another close call. Sarah arrived early, finding me at the computer before I'd had time to hide my work. On the screen was my manuscript, now 90 pages of polished memories and teaching wisdom. Her face went white, then red with rage. "What is this?" she demanded. But instead of cowering, I felt that old teacher authority rising in my chest. "It's my life," I said calmly. "My stories. My choice." For the first time in months, Sarah was the one who looked uncertain. She'd been expecting a week-old woman. Instead, she found her mother. The competency evaluation was scheduled for Thursday morning. Sarah thought she'd won, booking the appointment without my knowledge and arranging for her chosen psychiatrist to assess my mental state. What she didn't know was that James had done his homework. Dr. Martinez wasn't just any psychiatrist, he was a specialist in elder rights who'd testified in dozens of cases about family manipulation and coercive control. When Sarah walked into that evaluation, she was walking into a trap she'd set for herself. I played my part beautifully. When Dr. Martinez asked about my daily activities, I mentioned my writing with just the right amount of hesitation. "My daughter thinks it's silly," I said, glancing nervously at Sarah. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I should focus on simpler things." Sarah's satisfied smile told me she thought I was admitting defeat. But Dr. Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly, the first sign that he was seeing through her game. When he asked to see some of my writing, Sarah quickly interrupted. "Oh, that's just confused rambling. Nothing coherent." "I'd like to judge that for myself," Dr. Martinez said mildly. The authority in his voice made Sarah's face flush. She tried to maintain control, suggesting that my obsession with writing proved my mental decline. But when I handed him 3 polished chapters of my book, stories about teaching, about resilience, about the power of believing in young minds, his expression changed completely. "This is extraordinary work," he said. "Coherent, insightful, beautifully crafted. Mrs. Henderson, how long have you been writing?" The evaluation continued for 2 hours. Dr. Martinez tested my memory, my reasoning, my judgment. Every answer I gave was clear, thoughtful, and demonstrated sharp mental acuity. When he asked about my future plans, I spoke passionately about finishing my book, about sharing my teaching experiences with new educators, about proving that wisdom doesn't have an expiration date. Sarah's confidence crumbled with each of my responses. She'd expected to present a confused, declining woman. Instead, her mother was articulate, passionate, and clearly in full possession of her faculties. The final blow came when Dr. Martinez asked Sarah about her concerns. As she listed my symptoms, independence, creativity, determination to pursue my goals, he took careful notes. But his expression grew colder with each word. When she finished, he asked quietly, "Mrs. Patterson, why do you believe your mother's desire to write and teach represents mental decline?" Sarah's answer, that old people should accept their limitations and stop trying to contribute, sealed her fate. Dr. Martinez closed his notebook with a sharp snap. That evening, as Sarah waited anxiously for the results, I sat at my kitchen table writing. Not with desperation now, but with joy. My phone buzzed with messages from former students who'd heard about my book project. Offers to help, to edit, to promote my work. Publishers expressing interest. Literary agents asking for samples. While Sarah had been trying to silence me, I'd been building an audience that wanted to hear every word I had to say. The irony was delicious. The call from Dr. Martinez came Friday morning. Sarah grabbed the phone first, expecting vindication. Instead, she heard words that shattered her world. "Mrs. Patterson, I found no evidence of cognitive decline in your mother. In fact, she demonstrates exceptional mental acuity for any age. However, I do have concerns about the family dynamics I observed." Sarah's face went chalk white. Her hands trembled as she held the phone, listening to the professional destruction of her carefully laid plans. "Furthermore," Dr. Martinez continued, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "the pattern of behavior you've described, attempting to isolate your mother from her interests, dismissing her autonomy, preparing legal documents without her knowledge, raises serious questions about elder abuse. I'm required by law to report these concerns to the appropriate authorities." The phone slipped from Sarah's fingers, clattering onto my kitchen floor. For the first time in months, she had nothing to say. That afternoon brought the second wave of my counterattack. James arrived with a stack of legal documents that would make Sarah's conservatorship impossible. But more importantly, he brought news that made my heart soar. "3 publishers want to see your full manuscript," he said, grinning. "One of them specializes in memoirs by educators. They're calling it exactly what the world needs right now, wisdom from someone who's actually lived it." The kitchen filled with the scent of victory, sweet as my grandmother's apple pie. But the most satisfying moment came when Margaret wheeled in a surprise. 27 former students had driven from across the state to support me. Doctors, teachers, lawyers, business owners, all successful adults who credited their third-grade teacher with changing their lives. They filled my living room, sharing stories of how I'd believed in them when no one else would. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching the evidence of my life's impact surround her like an ocean of testimony. "We heard someone was trying to silence Mrs. Henderson," said Tommy Martinez, now Dr. Martinez, the principal who'd called weeks ago. "We're here to make sure that doesn't happen." One by one, they spoke about lessons I'd taught them, books I'd helped them love, confidence I'd given them when they thought they were stupid. The room buzzed with laughter and memories and the undeniable proof that my stories mattered, that my wisdom had value, that 80 years of living and 40 years of teaching had created something beautiful and lasting. As evening fell and my supporters finally left, Sarah sat alone at my kitchen table. The conservatorship papers lay shredded in the trash. The competency evaluation had backfired spectacularly. Her attempts to control me had been exposed as abuse. And worst of all for her, she'd been forced to witness the truth she'd tried so hard to deny. Her mother wasn't past her prime. She was just hitting her stride. 6 months later, I stood in Barnes & Noble, signing copies of Lessons from Room 12, A Teacher's Guide to Never Giving Up. The book had become an unexpected bestseller, not just among educators but among anyone who'd ever been told they were too old, too late, too past their prime. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah's attempts to silence me had given me the most powerful voice I'd ever had. The publisher's marketing team couldn't believe the response. Pre-orders had crashed their website. Education conferences were bidding against each other for speaking engagements. Movie producers were calling about adaptation rights. "We've never seen anything like this," my editor gushed. "It's like people were starving for authentic wisdom from someone who'd actually lived it." The book tour stretched across 12 states, with every venue selling out within hours of tickets going on sale. But the sweetest justice came in smaller moments. Like the day Sarah showed up at my door with a bouquet of apologies and a face full of shame. "I was wrong," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was so afraid of losing you that I tried to control you instead of celebrating you." The conversation lasted 3 hours, the first honest talk we'd had in years. She'd been forced into family therapy as part of the elder abuse investigation, and was finally facing the damage her controlling behavior had caused. The legal consequences for Sarah were serious but not devastating. James had negotiated a settlement that focused on change rather than punishment. Sarah paid for my legal fees, contributed to an elder rights organization, and completed anger management counseling. More importantly, she had to publicly apologize in a letter published in our local newspaper, acknowledging her attempt to silence me and celebrating my book's success. Reading that letter, I felt the last of my anger dissolve into something better: understanding. The most powerful moment came during my appearance on national television. The host asked about my message for older adults who'd been told their time was over. I looked directly into the camera, thinking of all the grandmothers and grandfathers watching from their living rooms, wondering if their stories mattered anymore. "Age doesn't diminish wisdom," I said. "It concentrates it. Every year you've lived has taught you something valuable. Don't let anyone convince you that experience is worthless. The world needs your voice now more than ever." 2 years after that cruel morning in my kitchen, I sit in my writing studio, the converted garage that Sarah helped me renovate as part of her ongoing amends. My second book, Teaching Through the Decades, just hit the New York Times bestseller list. My online course for new teachers has over 50,000 enrolled students. The Never Too Late Scholarship Fund I established has helped hundreds of older adults pursue creative dreams they'd abandoned. The silence Sarah once tried to impose has become a symphony of voices refusing to be quiet. The irony is beautiful in its completeness. Sarah, who once dismissed my stories as worthless, now serves as my business manager. She handles my speaking engagements, manages my correspondence with readers, and has become my fiercest protector against anyone who suggests I'm doing too much for my age. The daughter who tried to put me away now ensures I have everything I need to keep creating, keep teaching, keep proving that wisdom has no expiration date. The letters arrive daily, thousands of them. Retired teachers inspired to share their classroom stories. Grandmothers writing their family histories. Former students, now grandparents themselves, passing down lessons I taught them decades ago. Each envelope contains proof that my voice matters, that experience has value, that the attempts to silence me only amplified my message. My kitchen table, once covered with Sarah's cruel plans for my future, now overflows with evidence of lives changed by refusing to accept limitations. Last week, a 90-year-old woman sent me her first published poem. You showed me it's never too late, she wrote. I thought my time was over. Instead, it was just beginning. Reading her words, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a lesson well taught. This is what teachers live for, the moment when students surpass their instructors, when inspiration creates more inspiration, when one voice encourages others to sing. As I finish writing this final chapter, the sunset streams through my studio windows, painting everything golden. At 82, I'm not slowing down, I'm speeding up. Book 3 is half finished. The documentary about late-life creativity is in production. The foundation is expanding internationally. Sarah's attempts to convince me I was past my prime became the catalyst for the most productive, meaningful years of my life. Sometimes the cruelest words, when met with quiet strength and unwavering purpose, become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. The world told me to be quiet. Instead, I chose to roar.